So now you know a little bit more about systems. Hopefully you feel equipped with principles so that you can apply them to your own design process. Even if you don't work with a design system, it is likely that you've already been designing systematically. Working in digital products and technology requires to constantly think about optimization and scalability. In other words, it requires thinking in systems. In the previous chapter, we talked about systems thinking mindsets. In this one, we're going to talk about how to create foundations for a design system. There are multiple ways to organize and map out a system. A system model is an answer to how do we organize this so that it does its job, costs less, and grows more. The atomic design is probably the most commonly used. Brad Frost talked about it for the first time in his book of the same name, Atomic Design. This is an exciting model because it organizes components depending on their complexity. And it's also a great metaphor to talk about the system with people outside the team. We also have the foundations model. Andrew Cudwell, in his book Laying the Foundations, talks about the model he created when he was a design systems lead. He created this model to establish a simple common language for everyone to align on. In his book, Andrew talks about design systems with a metaphor of building. Remember in lesson 2, we talked about that if we had X-ray vision and we were able to look into a building, we would see these components that are like plumbing pipes or cabling that sustain systems like utilities inside each home in a repeatable, systematic way. This last model is the one we'll focus on for this lesson. So let's talk about foundations. Design foundations are the pillars of a system, but even foundations are built after principles. In his book, Andrew Cudwell talks about how system foundations should be based on a company's brand book. These are the initial base principles that the system stems from. Brand books contain a lot of valuable knowledge that we need to understand and internalize because they will help us make fundamental decisions about the system. An example of information you can find in a brand book is company mission and vision. The mission is what a company does, and a vision is how they do it. For example, a company's mission may be to make project management effortless. But how they do it, the vision, is what sets them apart from their competition. From these guidelines, you should be able to define principles to influence the entire system. But keep in mind that a brand book is a design system in itself, and as such is ever growing. So collaboration between product and brand is key to make sure that both of these systems grow consistently and scalably. Remember how we said the systems designers focus on the small things? Let's take a look at those things and what they actually look like. I want to focus on the core elements that are usually found on any given system. Those elements are color, typography, and iconography. Color is a critical part to understanding a user interface. Through contrast and hues, it helps user identify functionalities, predict outcomes, and understand hierarchical relationships between elements. The thing about color is that it can be studied from many different angles. We can think about the emotional aspect of color, which is usually how brand colors are chosen, or we can go about it mathematically and try to understand different color web profiles. This is what makes color so complex, but it's also what makes it fun. Next, we'll talk about requirements for a color system. A color system should be consistent with our brand. It is one of the ways that we tell the story of our brand. However, we should draw a line when branding guidelines compromise the experience for our users. This is why foundations should always be created in collaboration with a brand representative who can advocate for storytelling and consistency. A color system can be as simple or complex as your website or product is. For example, an application like Asana or Trello helps users organize their content. Projects have so much metadata and content that it needs to be easy to find and consume. Color is excellent support for this use case. So for a product like this, we should have a very flexible and extensive color palette. But for filming, the content is primarily images and video, so the user doesn't need much color. For this reason, color systems should follow principles that are true to the nature of our product. And now that we're clear on requirements, let's put them into practice. We're going to pick some colors. Color hues. Choosing hues requires a lot of thought. Use the company's brand book to inform your decisions. For example, suppose you're creating a color palette for a luxury fashion brand. Some trends I can find looking at other brands like Louis Vuitton or Chanel is that they have a monochromatic approach to color. This is a clear example that their design system is neutral. I'd probably go with no more than 5 hues. I would choose a black or a grayscale that would serve 98% of the whole website. And then provide a classic collection of 4 hues with a semantic meaning: blue, green, yellow or orange, and red. If you browse their website for a bit, you might not find any examples of these hues. However, if you go through a purchase flow, you might find some colors. For example, green. Green is typically used to support a positive message. A message like, your order was done successfully. Color shades. Once we have the hues, it's time to create the shades. Ideally, these shades should cover applications from different levels of contrast between surfaces to text, icons, or borders. To cover these cases, the shade scale you create should fit some requirements. Enough contrast between shades to clearly convey hierarchy. Enough range to meet different WCAG contrast requirements. A consistent level of saturation for all shades. In this color palette, you'll find that the lighter shades can be combined to express different hierarchy levels without feeling muddy. These combinations should feel intentional. Understanding contrast is paramount to create a color palette. But to create a color system that is predictable and scales with our product, we need to understand much more. Color is a fantastic problem space to dive into. Feel free to pause this video and dig into color a little further. In the course material, you will find resources to learn about color theory, color tooling, and accessibility. It's essential to audit and explore the product that you're servicing in order to understand the different use cases for text. You will want to have variety, but also keep it as limited as possible so that the system is easy to learn, implement, and combine. Let's talk about font choices. If you're a designer, you may be chuckling right now because you know that designers love their fonts. But in Lesson 5, remember that we established that a good design system should be neutral. But besides style, which should be consistent with the brand guidelines, there's a lot more that goes into choosing a font. It's common to stumble upon products that don't actually choose a font. Instead, they use system fonts. These are the default fonts for each operating system or browser. A good argument to support this decision is user experience. Respecting native defaults helps the user consume the information in the context that they're most comfortable with. An argument against using system fonts would be that, depending on the system, components would render differently, limiting the control that we have over what things look like. Font weights. Having different weights can help us create hierarchy between the text of the same size. This is handy for content body, for example, to allow portions of the text to stand out. Font sizes. Size is the primary way we create contrast. Make sure you have enough sizes for headings. The default size of a font can be measured in many different units. Choosing the suitable unit is a job to be done with developers. As a design systems team, however small it is, you will have to make fundamental decisions on technical solutions that will one day become a legacy. How text is handled is one of them. Line height. There are multiple approaches to choosing line height. Visually, multiplying the size by 1.25 to 1.28 will yield the most visually balanced line height for headings. And as for content body, 1.5 to 1.6. One of the problems with this approach is that even though it can be solved programmatically, it may result in odd numbers, which might mess with the vertical rhythm of the pages. The most essential part of all of this is that a typographic scale should be explicitly documented with examples and formatting. Don't forget that we're doing technical work so others don't have to. Iconography. Icons are images and symbols with the purpose of communication inside an interface. They're valuable assets to the user experience because they express a lot with very little. As they say, an image is worth 1,000 words. This translates into more efficient use of real estate and a lower cognitive load for users. Icons can have different functions. An icon can clarify. For example, in instances where text is ambiguous, an icon can clarify what the text actually means. Icons can convey interactivity. They can guide and signal the user toward their desired action. So what are some considerations to take into account when developing an iconography system? Define icon usage. So we finally introduced an icon set and everyone is excited. Icons make prototypes feel closer to a real product, and it's really easy to find reason to use them everywhere. Overcrowding the UI with icons can have the opposite effect and actually increase cognitive load. We can avoid this by creating usage guidelines with do's and don'ts. Standardized metaphors. For example, if your product is expressing actions with physical office objects like a bin or a folder, make sure to make that a rule so that it's always consistent when adding new icons. Define all the technical details like sizes and what each size is for. For example, if you serve multiple devices with different resolutions, you may need more than one size for the same icon. These are three of the most recurring elements in design systems, and they're also ones that we tend to work on out of intuition because they're so visual. However, there are other foundational elements like sound or grids or spacing that can also be found in design systems. But they're much more complex and they come with a lot of technical implications. But in the course material, you will find resources to expand on your foundations knowledge. So as you've seen in this chapter, we're not just working on the small things. We're actually working on the material that is going to be part of beautiful products and websites, and watching those materials develop and be combined and then be propagated through a product is like watching a story develop. In the next chapter, we're going to start writing that story.